what we did was with the school, we almost immediately transitioned to online teaching. And of course, initially hated it, but very quickly, the main thing what we did with the school was we adjusted to what works with virtual teaching, because in a virtual setting, we realized that the class size mattered. And so we had to double our teaching time, but we had to reduce the class size, for example. And that kind of worked. The children remained engaged, and the parents were really happy to send their kids to us because schools were closed. And we were offering dance lessons online, and they loved it. And in fact, I feel we did a lot better during the pandemic because we were able to engage these children creatively on a virtual medium. And we got used to this Zoom platform, which was improving by the week.
Right. It was improving. Yeah. So I'm going to just jump over to Junius and say, okay, talk a little bit about thriving through these VUCA moments for you.
Yeah. So I think for urban artistry, we were in a unique situation. We are an all-volunteer organization, and we started in 2005 outside of a dance school in a park, trying to figure out if we could find a way to sustain our cultures responsibly, in a way that felt good, that we didn't have to give up our traditions or change what it is that we were doing to fit into someone else's space. When I look back that far, the key thing was the community that showed up. So one of our things during the pandemic and other times, in 2008, when things got tough for a lot of families, is we just invested in each other. Mental health, loaning money where we could, how we operated as people before we were a business. We just had to go back to that because those people are the reason why we're thriving. I would say thriving with a lowercase t. But I would say that was probably the thing that I wanted to do most. And also improving our cultural sustainability programming. Like, what does it mean in hip hop culture? What does it mean in funk culture and house music and dance culture? What does that mean to sustain, to continue to do what it is that we do? And yeah, that took a lot of thinking and getting our community to understand what it means to invest in the future for itself. And organizations, that do what they can to help provide funding is one thing. But when that money is gone, we're in places where we're already on the margins. So who's going to take care of them? So having a good mix of that, I think has been how we've survived the last 17 years.
Beautiful. So when I think about VUCA, and the first V is volatile, but I also think that it's vulnerable, right? Right, Debbie? And so talk to me about driving through this VUCA moment.
Yeah. And certainly I'll just say, we're still in it. I think that, even our president has said the pandemic is over. It's not even so much the pandemic anymore, it's all the aftermath of the pandemic that we are kind of almost a new industry. We're rebirthing our industry, we're reimagining. But I think the vulnerability is so key. We are in the business, our mission is to produce and present live performance. When that was taken away from us, the ability to bring people together to experience live performance, what do we have, right? We all really sort of were faced with an existential crisis. Who are we? The thing we exist to do can't be done. We didn't move to virtual. We did very little digital programming in the very beginning when we thought it was going to be 6 weeks of a lockdown or something. And we quickly learned that kind of thing wasn't for us. It wasn't our core competency. We weren't putting out our best product. And it was a bit of a waste of energy and resources for us. So instead, we too looked at ourselves. How can we invest in our community, our full-time staff, our part-time staff, our artists. Normal year, we're employing more than 500 artists. All of those people had lost work. And really, sort of sticking together and using each other to inspire ourselves. I will say what helped us through the vulnerability, and this is going to sound very CEO-like, I guess, or type A, we did a lot of planning. The Wallace Foundation had put out a toolkit for kind of getting through the pandemic. I don't know if any of you were familiar with it. We used it really seriously as a guide to imagine different scenarios. There were 4 different scenarios that they gave in this toolkit. One being, the pandemic's gonna end and everything's gonna go back to normal. 2, utter disintegration of society. There's no need for live performance or anything like that. What do you do? And so, anyway, and in between, and I'm exaggerating a little bit, but that actually was the title, was like social disintegration. And we went through a process of, we followed the toolkit and imagined what we could be as Olney Theater Center if one of those 4 scenarios emerged. And it was really helpful to realize that in what felt like the worst scenario, we still found a way to matter. We still would find a way to use our creativity and our storytelling skills and our ability to bring people together, to heal, to grow, to understand, create empathy, that we would have a place, even if our facility turned into, an annex for the hospital or something like that, or for schools. And that was actually, for me, it was just sort of helpful to be like, okay, I got plan A, B, C, and D. And I think that kind of helped get through that vulnerability. And, where are we? What scenario are we in now? We're sort of in between some of them, I think. But it did help give some confidence to get through.
That's interesting.
Where we are today.
Yeah, we heard all of this right on the ground,
Right.
and so we're like March 13th or 12th,
Right.
13th, we pack up our stuff and I'm like, okay, everybody, we're gonna go home. And we all just looked at each other and we just left everything on our desks and, we just kind of went home. And so then for us, we didn't have an existential crisis. In fact, we had a capacity crisis.
Right.
It's like, how are we gonna meet this need? Because we started hearing from you who thought yours was the only phone call, and yours who was like, I'm sure you, and maybe you, and you, and you, and you, and you, and we started hearing from all of us. And we have at that time we had 6 people working there. And so it was like, okay, we hear it, and because we're also creators, we're feeling it, and what are we gonna do about this? And so like you, we planned first. We said, okay, what do we have to do? We gotta get the money out of the door quickly. So I remember that one night I was like, okay, if you got money, take it. If you think you're getting money, give it to them. If you think that they can't do the project that they thought they were gonna do, just give it to them anyhow. If they thought money was coming, give it to them. How do I give it to them quickly? I'm not writing checks. What technology? And it was like, Bill.com. Okay, let's start researching that. Let's get that. And so it was like, how do we do this at this ultra hyper level while centering you in it and then trying to figure out what are the new business operations. So like you, we went through it too. We went through it on this other side of it, constantly trying to think about how to center. And like I said earlier today, having those equity principles in our head all the time helped us continue to center what it was that we were supposed to do. And so when we did the planning, knowing what we were right, being clear-headed with our mission, that really helped. And it sounds like all of you also had to think about how am I more clear-headed? How is my vision even clearer about my mission, so that I can get right, like, to the jugular vein of that, and all the ephemera, while I understand it to be so, I gotta just deal with how am I gonna get somebody's food, how am I gonna make sure people get paid and stay in line, and how do we determine, like, who are we now? Really fascinating. So talk to me about staff morale, staff development, organizational structuring, human resource allocation, because, a lot, like when people look at us, they, you might have this Tom and Jerry kind of look where you see us and you see dollar signs in our eyes, but from a resource standpoint, financial resources are just one thing, but human resources by far for the Arts and Humanities Council is our most valuable asset.
Yeah.
Our most valuable asset. So what did you do about that?
I mean, in my case, I think for us, the dancers, as well as our staff, of course, but the dancers were mostly college-age children, and they were not colleges, they were back home. And they were going through incredibly volatile emotions and uncertain. They were feeling very uncertain, they were very depressed. And I definitely felt that there has to be an avenue for them through dance. And so we curated an entire year-long online virtual performance series for them. And where we showcased each of them in their solo performances, so they had something to work towards. And a solo performance meant a lot of work on their own. And then we used the summer months to record them outdoors so we could stream. And meanwhile, I used all of their expertise. We used them to create a virtual website a virtual platform on our website, so that we could stream through our website to our audiences. And we were surprised that we were able to engage an international audience. We got viewership from Europe, from Russia, from Australia, from India. This was like a bonus for us, and we had post-performance discussions. And we had people from all over engaging with our dancers. So it meant it made a huge difference to the dancers and to the general morale of the organization.
Right, so when we all went home, we weren't seen anymore, right?
Yeah, exactly.
So being able to be seen in that situation and feel a sense of belonging, that sounds like it was quite
And it was
important.
just one more thing. We decided to partner with the largest online Indian arts marketing platform called Indian Raga, and to create an online marketing campaign called Why I Dance. Now, Why I Dance is one of these curated productions that we had done internally in Kalanidhi pre-pandemic, but we used that concept to first on our own students, saying, why don't you create a little video of why you dance? And they spoke about it, they danced a bit, and we created this sense of community and that feeling of worthiness and really introspection as well as to why they do this, what it means to them. But then we scaled it worldwide, and through this Indian Raga platform, which is a powerful platform, and we had over 1 million views, and we had over 114 dancers worldwide participate in this campaign. And it was incredibly meaningful, and it warmed all of our hearts and everybody's. We got so many thank you letters from dancers around the world saying thank you for doing this, because we feel like we're part of something, because everyone was hooked up in their own worlds, and they had something to connect with and through. So that was...
Right. You talked about, what did you say, the disintegration of society. So you can think of disintegration in one way, but when I thought about it, it's true, right? We were disintegrated.
Exactly. Yeah.
Right. So what did you do, Junius? You already talked about giving some real on-the-ground support. What about staff morale, development, organizational structure? What did you do?
Well, we had to literally open our communities back up. There's no secret that hip hop culture is a global phenomenon, and we have communities in other countries, and their sub-communities. And I think what the pandemic did was it allowed us to reach out to those communities for some of their resources, and also how they were maintaining indoors with the staff. It really took us to stop and reevaluate what we're doing. Most of my staff, I've been with them since they were 19, 20, 21, and they all have families and children now. So we had to reevaluate what we've done in the past and where we want to go in the future, and how does that connect with these global communities. And we were able to do some healing with that, and also some planning for things that we can do in the future. A lot of the things that we do at Urban Artistry is mostly about healing. It's a reconciliation of sorts. I'm not that old, but leaning on 49, I remember when these communities, like I grew up in funk music culture, like, so I watched that change into this rap thing that turned into this hip hop thing that turned into this house music thing. There was just so much going on, and I couldn't help but remember as I was growing how many people we left behind, how many communities were now disappearing. And those of you who remember what crack and AIDS did, you know, at first you understand that, like, artist communities just kind of fell apart. And this was the fear that we were dealing with. So we literally opened up our doors, did some reflection on what we didn't want to happen in our communities, and got to work. And we're still working through it.
Thank you. So Debbie, you talked about kind of like that like who we are, who are we, existential crisis that you felt, and then coming together. So what have you learned?
I've learned a great deal. I've learned things that I think I knew before but didn't have a chance or an opportunity to put into practice. But I mean, with respect to just sort of your other question about human resources too and our staff, yeah, that's our most important asset, right? Our full-time staff, I mentioned it before, artists, I mean, hundreds and hundreds of people depended on us for their income, the food on their table and care for their children, and the unknowns were huge. We had to sort of prioritize, them. When you work in a small business, which is how I view our nonprofit, you really know a lot about the people you work with. I knew whose kids were, needing braces that year, or, applying to college, and who was sick, who had ailing parents. I mean, people were carrying a lot of stuff in the midst of all this. I have 2 teenagers, and my husband's income was immediately affected when the pandemic with the shutdown in March. I knew what I was going through, and I knew what everybody else was going through. And so it was really I felt a great need to be even more transparent than I normally am. We're a very transparent organization. But we just sort of really opened up, I think, everything. We talked about budget. We talked about how, with our staff, how we make these decisions and why. But we also had opportunities for our staff to, I just think we had more time available to allow our staff to bring ideas that really were impactful and helped make change. Things we were grappling with. How can we increase salaries? Well, one of our staff members had a great idea, so it was like sort of really listening and spending more time listening. And so to that end, what the biggest thing I've learned, in my 8 years, I started this position 8 years ago. I'm going to admit this, it's embarrassing, but I thought that my job when I started, that I needed to have all the answers, that I needed to be able to be really definitive with decisions and plans, that I needed to have all the answers. What I know now is I don't have the answers. The people around me have the answers, and my job is to encourage them to ask questions. My job is really to ask questions, right? And to get those answers. And that's been, I think, a wonderful thing to learn as a leader, as a human, as a person, that the answers are in the room, and they're not in any one person's head at all. But we have to provide space for people to feel empowered and opportunities to make suggestions and share ideas to get those answers. I've also learned that a good night's sleep is key for me, and that I cannot live and sustain at all if I'm waking up throughout the night, which I was doing even before the pandemic, and I kind of was the kind of person that thrived on, I don't need sleep. I can get up before in the morning and answer those emails and read that letter or whatever, and then I will go and be a mom, and then I'll go to work, and then I'll get it all done. No, and I'm not going to, I'm going to prioritize my sleep and my health and my sanity above everything else. So I had to learn that that's not being selfish, and that's not falling short of our responsibilities. So that was big work. But I've learned so many other things, but not just those two.
That's really, that's really good, because I too have learned some of those lessons. I will also share that there's a writer who has written a piece. Her name is Tema Okun, and the name of the piece, I think, is Tenets of White Supremacy. And the interesting piece about it is that when you think about urgency, you think about perfection, you think about these things that are really kind of demons, like you can't be perfect. It doesn't have to be done yesterday. You don't need 1 minute of sleep to finish that audit report. The things that we teach ourselves and each other, like, this is the way I know that you're high performing. Well, we're killing ourselves.
Exactly.
And this is not what a high-performing organization looks like. Taking the time to put the ear to the ground, to share that power, to invest in oneself, to love one another, to care about where we really are. This is actually what I have learned.
Yeah.
And then I refer to that document often, because I'll see myself, I'll rush around the house to try to throw myself downstairs to get to a meeting on Zoom.
Right.
And you know what I mean? And then finally it's like, I have to say, Susan, what are you rushing for? What are you rushing for? Just take a minute.
Yeah.
It will happen. It will be fine. But there's so much in society that pushes these tenets. And I think that during the pandemic, one of the things that I think was really incredible is that everybody had to take account of those kinds of things that you mentioned. So what about you? What have you learned?
That we are more resilient than we think we are. And the power of community, I think, is, and how to harness that community and that collective energy, because together we could achieve so much more, and together we could maintain that sense of connection and bring meaning to whatever we do.
Yes,
So very
resiliency. Really beautiful. Beautiful. And you, Junius?
I've learned to be still. I've learned to be still.
Isn't that incredible?
Yeah. Learned so much by just being still, and not trying to, again, take it all on. And I really felt that I needed to do more than I had to, actually.
Yeah.
And I think it showed in my support system. People starting to kind of take care of the things they need to take care of. And I got to be an executive director, and not a dad, not a brother, not a bank. It really helped me, because I stayed still and I didn't run from person to person trying to provide solutions. People got to come to me and ask for what they needed, and we developed plans, and we sent them in the directions that we needed to go. I just didn't have to do it all. So that's what.
So beautiful.
I wanted to add one thing because I feel it's certainly relevant for this group, but I think a big thing that I learned, which was a bit of a slap in the face as an arts professional, is that we as a community, as an arts community, worldwide, nationwide, even here, right here in Montgomery County, we have to be better about demonstrating that our work matters and that it is as important as everything else that matters. It really did feel like the arts got put into, oh, it is just an extra. It's not a priority the way, and hey, education's super important, health is super important, but then it was like, well, bowling's important too, and these things slowly, as we were reopening, it was like every single business and industry reopened. Restaurants seemed to be the most important thing in this country. That was representing economic health or our ability to recover. And it was such for me, a slap in the face because I feel arts are the most important thing. It's hard to imagine, what are we doing if we don't have it? But I think it's on us to demonstrate how important it is. It's on us to ensure that the next generations are participating in the arts, believe it's important, they know it's important, So this was, and I think we sort of developed this mantra at Almy Theater where it's like, the next time there's or the next time there is some, threat, we need to make sure we are not shut down, that we are prioritized as much as every other industry.
So when that meteor attacks us, we're gonna have a great big shield around the earth that's made by artists. Okay, that's what we're doing. Silver lining stories, friends. Anything quick you want to share about thriving?
Of course, the Arts Council support was tremendous. That was the silver line. The support was critical, I feel, and helped many of us get through the pandemic. The second is, again, back to our teaching program, discovered that we could be pretty effective virtually because we could timestamp and correct and then to do video submissions. And for the first time, they saw themselves dance and said, oh, now I know what you're trying to say. They couldn't see it in class, but they could see it on video.
Oh, isn't that
so there
great?
were many advantages actually.
That's really great.
The final advantages, I feel, even though we love being in person and we're looking forward to more in-person productions, performances, everything that we do now, we have a hybrid version too. So it's just, and there are many efficiencies in this in the virtual world that we're able to take advantage of today because the pandemic forced us to become comfortable.
Yeah. Silver lining, Eunice?
Silver lining for us is reaching out to other communities and bringing them in. We get to teach them more about this area, about Montgomery County and Maryland at large, and the traditions that we have here. 2 weeks ago, we hosted 23 artists from 11 countries through another program, just doing art in different places, and doing conflict transformation, entrepreneurship, performing rights, cultural sustainability, archiving, doing classes on these things, but throughout the day, going to the sites, going to the clubs, talking to the elders, for me, that's the silver lining. I think before the pandemic, we were focused on how we sustained ourselves, how do we keep our building, how do we keep our space, and now it's like people from outside, so far removed from our experience, are now coming here a little bit more and taking a deeper dive and trying to understand our art forms as more than fun, as they're trying to understand them as culture.
Serious cultural expression.
And how can they be a part of that responsibly? I think that's the silver lining. I think people are starting, at least in the communities that I'm engaging with, are starting to care about each other a little bit more.
Beautiful. Debbie?
Well, certainly, the funding was a silver lining. I mean, money is great, but it was more than that. That was, oh yeah, we do matter, right? That was the funding from the Arts Council, from the federal government, from the state, and then really asking ourselves, how can we make the most of it? We were able to create some new, really important positions. Even though it was one-time funding, it forced us to prioritize positions that we had not prioritized before because they weren't necessarily income-generating positions, but we knew that they were important. And so prioritizing that, and now we're in the position of having to ensure we can continue to fund them, but we prioritize them. That I think was a wonderful silver lining, and an enormous amount of change has happened in the theater industry as a result of the pandemic and so many other things that have happened in the last 2.5 years to force us to work smarter and healthier and in a kinder, more sustainable way. So those are silver linings. I also think, and this may not sound like a silver lining, but I think it is. Listen, the traditional theater audience has not returned to the theater. This is an older audience, right? For centuries, theater has been trying to attract a new, younger, different audience.
We're here now.
Right? And so we're forced. For years it's like, well, we're trying. Well, there are new opportunities to change the way we produce and program. We are seeing even just live performance is moving into, what is really popular? Well, things that are immersive and interactive and different. And we're learning how to do that. And it's really exciting. So there's, I think the silver lining is that the future is bright. There's a lot we learned. And just being a more caring and open-minded. It's weird because you think we're open-minded, we feel we're all open-minded, but we also feel like we've been doing things for so long that worked. There was a fear in trying something different, right, before, and now we're doing things differently, and it's working. And we're not as afraid we're not as afraid to try.
We're not as afraid to try.
Yeah.
So with that, I want to thank all of our conversationalists today who weren't afraid to try.